Also known as Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth, this 19th film in the franchise reintroduces a friendly face in Mothra and leans more heavily into the family-friendly fantasy setting that the Showa era was known for. Following the pattern established here in the Heisei era, Godzilla is once again an aggressor, a being to be feared by humanity in 1992's Godzilla vs. Mothra.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham, and I got my special guest Chris with me, and today we are talking about Godzilla vs. Mothra, or as it was known in the U.S., Godzilla and Mothra Battle, the Battle for Earth. Now, I like this film. I was a Heisei junkie when I was younger. You know, the Showa era, I didn't really get into rewatching them until I was a little older. So Biollante, King Ghidorah, Mechagodzilla, Mothra, Space Godzilla, Destroya, those were my bread and butter when I was, in my early, I'd probably say 7 to 11, 12 range. And this one's fun. I've seen it so many times that if I watch it too often, I find myself getting bored. So I try not to watch it as often as I used to, watch it maybe once or twice a year, and I can stick with it. But I love, like, the updated monster designs. I love the monster designs in this film. Characters aren't too bad, but I still find it enjoyable. And when it comes to my tier ranking on it, I guess we'll have to wait and see how much I like this film. But Chris, where do you stand on Godzilla vs. Mothra?
I'm pretty positive on it. I've always found that it was funny that the Japanese sort of titles, essentially, in the 60s it was Mothra versus Godzilla, then in the 90s it's Godzilla versus Mothra, but I guess to avoid confusion when they brought it to America, they sort of gave it a more, expanded title of Godzilla and Mothra, the Battle for Earth. But for me, this one is always just Godzilla versus Mothra, and the one from the 60s is Mothra versus Godzilla. I'm of that same generation where, for a number of years, we had Godzilla 2000 in theaters. Then I think it was 2 more years before we got Mega Gears or GMK in any kind of form in the US. So for, a good, 3 to 5 year chunk of time, the Heisei series was kind of the newest series for a lot of us American fans. And so I wore out these VHS tapes. For me, it was like, as a kid, the Showa movies, like, those were the old ones. Those were sort of the originals, the blueprint, the how it used to be. And the Heisei series was like, this is how it is. This is the main series. Like, that was the pregame, and this is like the official version. At least when I was a little kid, that was very much what my perception was. So I too have a lot of watch time on a lot of these entries, but I like Godzilla versus Mothra quite a bit. It happens to be the Godzilla movie that came out the year I was born, 92. So I've got a soft spot for it in some ways there. I've always enjoyed it. It's a nice, simple 90s upgrade of a vintage story. It's to contrast the previous film, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. This is a 90s upgrade that's a lot more in keeping with what the original type of Mothra vs. Godzilla storyline was. It's not as much of a dramatic departure. And so I always liked that. I like the introduction of a new monster like Batra, as well as having a classic monster like Mothra. Overall, like, I'm a fan of this one. There's a lot of, as I was rewatching, I was actually kind of surprised. I thought I would be more sour on it. But there's a lot of just scenes, sequences, moments, and even lines that I just really kind of enjoyed and was like, oh yeah, this movie's got a lot of good little scenes and good sequences in it. And I was I was surprised at how much I really, really dug it.
Did you watch the sub or the dub version of this one?
For this one, I watched the dub. For the Heisei movies, I can't resist. I have nostalgia for the dubs. They're not great dubs. They don't really help the quality of the movies, but I'm hyper nostalgic for them, so I go dubs for the Heisei movies. Heisei Millennium, I go dubs.
Okay. I watched the sub for it, so I mean...
Okay.
And I've seen both, so I mean
I have watched both.
Yeah, so I mean it's not too far off on what they're actually saying, so I mean, at least this is one of the closer ones that I feel like I've found into what they're actually saying in Japanese compared to the dub.
Yeah, by the time they got to these films, they weren't really doing a lot of re-editing and reworking of the scripts and dialogues. Like, they weren't editing the films, they were just straight-up dub jobs, and they weren't really doing a lot of like, oh, we have to adapt this for an American audience. It's kind of a more or less straight dub. It's just sometimes I think, because they use a Hong Kong company. I think Toho used a third-party Hong Kong company to dub these movies. So you get some stuff lost in translation, and then generally speaking, you just don't have really good performances of the dialogue. It all either sounds a little too not excited or a little too overacted in excited moments. So it's like, it's all kind of like undercooked or overcooked, and maybe sometimes you get a sense that some things are lost in translation. But generally speaking, it's a pretty straightforward dub job if you just feel like watching it in English and not having to read the dialogue. And it doesn't destroy the enjoyment of the movies. That's just me though.
No, I completely agree with you that, sub or dub, if you want to read and watch the original, the Japanese version, I mean, feel free. But if you'd rather not read subtitles and just watch a dubbed version, I mean, the Heisei films, the dubbed versions don't take away as much as the Showa era did compared to what they're actually saying. I feel like the Showa era was definitely... things were changed way more often in that era.
Yeah, you had American companies sort of transforming those movies to be kind of a bit more tailor-made to American audiences, and like we said, sometimes they'd be re-edited or have new footage cut in and things of that nature. These are still the same films content-wise. It's just, the dubs are, stilted and not performed very well, but now, that the 90s movies are kind of their vintage in their own way. They're no longer the movies that are just a few years old. These 90 movies, new movies now are now all coming up on being 30 years old themselves. So now they're kind of vintage and they're kind of quaint and they kind of have this charming little like, remember when the dubs were kind of tacky and cheesy and the dubs weren't really good? Like, it kind of adds to the charm and the nostalgia to it for me. Yeah,
this film will be 31 this year, so this it's same age as you, or will be.
Yeah, same age. Yeah, I've already celebrated my 31st, but yeah, come December, this one will also be 31, and that's crazy to think about.
Yeah, because, I mean, we'll get into it, but, the special effects and everything look good, the designs look good, I mean...
Yeah, the Heisei series, these 90s movies kind of settle in on a spot where... the 80s movies kind of have their own look and feel for the visual effects, and then these 90s movies kind of settle in a spot that they kind of sit at for the duration of these 5 movies that were made in the 90s, these 5 Heisei movies in the 90s.
There's only one thing that I miss about the early on, the 80s movies, and then Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in this film, and that is the gritty, animalistic, like Godzilla roar. That's the only thing I miss in these next couple films. Yeah, and for this movie in particular, they changed the breath sound effect for Godzilla, and until you marathon the movies, you don't really notice it. But it's normally more of like a powerful kind of like, I imagine like if you were spraying a fire extinguisher, like a... And in this one, when Godzilla fires its breath, it's sort of this... it's kind of like a lighter beam, like wee kind of noise, and it was interesting to see that in this. I mean, I kind of like it just fine either way. I don't have a strong preference one or the other, but it's an interesting alteration. Yeah, I noticed that too, and I feel like I've noticed it a couple times, and I guess I've never had anybody to talk about it with, so now I do.
Yeah, well, and sometimes even within a single film, you'll get a few different audio executions of the breath. Like, it's not always the same one stock sound effect. So unless you're really watching these movies a lot and really paying attention, you're not really thinking strongly about this movie had this particular set of sounds and this movie had this particular set of sounds. But, you know, it's easy to see if you're really binging them.
For sure. And I'll go ahead and get into some info on Godzilla vs. Mothra for us. And I guess it's not really a fun fact. It's a little, I'm going to add it into my info, but it's the last thing I give you, I think you'll like. We talked about doing some of these movies in the future, so okay. I'll add that in there. Right. Godzilla vs. Mothra, again, also known as Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth, is a 1992 Japanese kaiju film directed by Takao Okawara, written by Kazuki Omori, and produced by Shogo Tamiyama. Produced and distributed by Toho Studios, this is the 19th film in the Godzilla franchise and the 4th film in the Heisei era. The film features the fictional monsters Godzilla, Mothra, and Batra, and stars Tetsuya Beso, Sotami Kobayashi, Takahiro Murata, and Megumi Odaka, Shiori Yonezawa, Mokato Otake, Akiji Kobayashi, Koichi Oeda, Shinya Oeda, Kaiki Omura, Sayaka Asawara, Saburo Shinoda, and Akira Takarada, with Kenpachiro Satsuma as Godzilla. This plot follows Batra and Mothra's attempts to stop Godzilla from attacking Yokohama. And this was originally conceived as a standalone Mothra film entitled Mothra vs. Bagan. The film is notable for its return to a more fantasy-based and family-oriented atmosphere, evocative of older Godzilla films, and although he did not return as director, Omori continued his trend of incorporating Hollywood elements into his screenplay, such as in this film, like little nods to the Indiana Jones franchise.
Yeah, I actually, I usually don't prefer fantasy to sci-fi, but I do like that they kind of, because Mothra is kind of, it's hard to do Mothra as a pure sci-fi character. I do kind of enjoy the fantasy side that Mothra opens up, more magic and stuff like that. You know, a magical monster, I guess, is equally as preposterous or not preposterous as a giant science-made monster. But I enjoy the Indiana Jones nods as well. I enjoy a lot of as we get into it in further discussion, I do enjoy a lot about the human side of this movie. So we'll elaborate on that further later. But I think in my opinion, it's a much stronger type of Godzilla screenplay than his last film of Godzilla versus King Ghidorah.
We're gonna end up fighting. You keep bashing my movie here. We're gonna have problems on this episode.
The hate will never stop.
That's all right. Godzilla vs. Mothra was released theatrically in Japan on December 12th, 1992, and was followed by Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla the following year. This film was released direct-to-video in the United States in 1998 by Columbia TriStar Home Video under the title, again, Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth. And this was the one for you. This film was the second highest grossing film in Japan in 1993, with Jurassic Park being the highest grossing.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's good company to have. I do know that this one was I think financially speaking, I'm not sure about raw ticket sales, but I think financially speaking, this was the most successful of the Heisei era. So that's very interesting to see and hear.
Yeah, for sure. And you are correct that it was the highest grossing of the Heisei era. I'll give you a fun fact right now. It sold 4.2 million tickets in Japan. It was the highest grossing of the Heisei era, and the best resulting film since one of your favorites, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster in 1964.
Very nice. Yeah, so it was very much the way that we now in modern days see them cashing in on nostalgia for, previous Spider-Mans from 20 years ago and things like that. This was very much sort of bringing the 60s level of popularity of Godzilla and Mothra back into the 90s. It was that, just, in a different era.
Yep, I mean, that's why they decided to bring Mothra back. She was incredibly popular among Japanese residents, and along with King Ghidorah in the previous film and Mechagodzilla in the next film, Toho says they kind of have like a top 5 or a big 5, Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, King Ghidorah, Mechagodzilla, and there's not too many movies you get where one of those isn't involved.
Yeah, that's very true, and it was interesting to hear, you mentioned the film that was almost made, the solo Mothra movie, Mothra versus Bagan or Bagan, however you want to pronounce it. But that's a monster, Bagan, Bagan, that has been, I think, considered for something like a dozen different Mothra or Godzilla movies at one point or another. I think it was even the villain in one of the old Nintendo Godzilla video games and never made a film debut. So it's one of these like mythical sort of unrealized creatures in the Godzilla pantheon that's never actually existed on film.
Yeah, I'm curious as to, because as we've done these episodes, like you said, we've heard that name multiple times, but never has it come to fruition, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and from what I understand, I think the one where it was featured in a video game, the artwork, in terms of the proportions, and it's got a big horn, and it's kind of got like the wings and the thicker thighs, and kind of the proportions and body shape of a Destroyer looking creature, just a different kind of color palette and things like that. But it's got a lot of those similar, it looks like it could be part of that same kind of like, element of monster. So, Destroyer kind of feels like the evolution of that concept of the theory behind it. But I know different versions and different movies had different incarnations of Bagan. I think one version was a bit of like a chimera shape-shifting monster. So, I mean, there's not any one set design, and it's never really officially been canonized in any film. So, but that video game did have a pretty clear design that felt very, very Destroyer-esque.
Well, Destroyer-esque, I wouldn't have been against it, because once we get to that film, I do like Destroyer. So.
Oh yeah, that's going to be a love fest.
Oh yeah, I'm glad we agree on that. But while we're on this film, I'll get into the trailer before we get too far, drop a plot synopsis, and then I'll come back right away and get some fun facts out of the way for you.
Absolutely, sounds good.
私たちはコスモス。それでこの先何が起こるっていうの？私たちが恐れているのはバトラもまたどこかで目を覚ましてはいないかということです。
地球 SOS。
モスラはバトラではありません。
特別な使命を持った生き物なんですよ。
ゴジラまで行方を見失ったか。
奴は我々の常識を超えた生物だ。人類の未来をかけた戦いが始まる。国際式の大決戦。ゴジラ対モスラ。
In mid-1992, following the events of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, a meteoroid crashes in the Ogasawara Trench and awakens Godzilla. 6 months later, explorer Takuya Fujito is detained after stealing an ancient artifact. Later, a representative of the Japanese Prime Minister offers to have Takuya's charges dropped if he explores Infant Island with his ex-wife Masako, Tezuka, and Kenji Ando, the secretary of the rapacious Muramoto Company. After the trio arrives on the island, they find a cave containing a depiction of two giant insects in battle. Further exploration leads them to a giant egg and a pair of diminutive humanoids called the Cosmos, who identify the egg as belonging to Mothra. The Cosmos tell of an ancient civilization that tried to control the Earth's climate 12,000 years ago, thus provoking the Earth into creating Batra. Batra, a male divine moth similar to Mothra, but much more fearsome in appearance, destroyed the civilization and their weather-controlling device, but then became uncontrollable and started to harm the very planet that created him. Mothra was then sent by the Earth to fight Batra, who eventually lost. The Cosmos explain how the meteorite uncovered Mothra's egg, and may have awoken Batra, who is still embittered over humanity's interference in the Earth's natural order. The Maritomo Company sends a freighter to Infant Island to pick up the egg, ostensibly to protect it. As they are sailing, Godzilla surfaces and head towards the newly hatched Mothra larva. Batra, also as a larva, soon appears and joins the fight, allowing Mothra to retreat. The battle between Godzilla and Batra is eventually taken underwater, where the force of the battle causes a giant crack on the Philippine sea plate that swallows the two. Masako and Takuya later discover Ando's true intentions when he kidnaps the Cosmos and takes them to the Maritomo headquarters, where the CEO intends to use them for publicity purposes. Mothra enters Tokyo in an attempt to rescue the Cosmos but is attacked by the JSDF. The wounded Mothra heads for the National Diet Building and starts constructing a cocoon around herself. Meanwhile, Godzilla surfaces from Mount Fuji while Batra frees himself from the Earth's crust and continues towards Japan. Both Mothra and Batra attain their imago forms and converge at Yokohama Cosmo World, where they begin to fight once more. Godzilla interrupts the battle and initially attacks Batra. Mothra then briefly incapacitates Godzilla and comes to Batra's aid before returning to battle with Godzilla. Batra then returns the favor, coming to Mothra's defense. Regrouping, the two moths decide to join forces against Godzilla, determining him to be the greater threat to the planet. Eventually, Mothra and Batra overwhelm Godzilla and carry it over the ocean. Godzilla bites Batra's neck and fires its atomic breath into the wound, killing him. A tired Mothra drops Godzilla and the lifeless Batra into the water below, sealing Godzilla below the surface by creating a mystical glyph with scales from her wings. The next morning, the Cosmos explained that Batra had been waiting for many years to destroy an even larger asteroid that would threaten the Earth in 1999. Mothra had promised she would stop the future collision if Batra were to die, and she and the Cosmos leave Earth as the humans bid farewell. All right, let me pick your brain a little with some fun facts, or what I call fun facts. This was the second highest grossing Japanese film of 1993, earning 2.22 billion yen. It is also the second highest grossing Toho film in Japan, only being surpassed by Shin Godzilla.
That's impressive.
Yeah, because Shin Godzilla was absolutely massive, so It's no surprise that passed any of the old Godzilla movies up.
Yeah, and from what I understand, this is true in a lot of countries, that they put more of an emphasis on the ticket sales, the admissions, and not necessarily the money made. Because if you just go by money made, the records will always be broken because of inflation. And so some countries kind of emphasize more the admissions. And this was a Godzilla movie, Shin Godzilla, and this one as well, both when they came out, were each the biggest ticket sellers since the 60s when the franchise was in its prime. And so the fact that that really puts it into perspective, that you had new entries that went back to the sort of the highest level of attendance for the franchise, that really says a lot.
Yeah, this Mothra was huge, but like I said, Shin Godzilla, when that came out, I wish I would have went and seen it in theaters here, but
I was lucky enough to see it. It was special. It was something special.
That's all right.
it's a dialogue heavy movie, and it was only subtitled in theaters, and so some of the dialogue was flying by so fast that even me, being a fairly fast reader, fairly proficient reader, when they're getting in, they're subtitling everybody's character name and job in the government, and they're talking lightning fast about science and exposition and all these things. Like, sometimes it was hard to keep up with some of the dialogue, so I appreciate the dub on that movie even more.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I got to enjoy it. I got, the 70-inch and the surround sound at home in the man cave living room, so we cranked her up here.
Yeah, not a bad way to enjoy it at all.
Not at all. Scenes from the 1961 film Mothra are echoed throughout this film. In both films, Mothra survives a JSDF napalm attack at sea, attacks Tokyo, and then attempts to recover her kidnapped priestesses, builds a cocoon on top of a Tokyo landmark, reunites with the Shobijin at an airport in the final scene, and then producer Shogo Tamiyama also attempted to find a part for Frankie Sakai, who played Senichiro Fukada in the original Mothra, but the actor's schedule prevented him from being able to appear in this film.
Would have been nice to see. I'm glad they got Akira Takarada in kind of a small role in this film. That was a fun little throwback that, again, until I became an adult and actually was able to be paying attention a little bit more, I never realized that he was in so many of the Showa films, and then that he was then brought back in this film.
Yeah, it's always nice to see those callbacks to the Showa era and have those actors make an appearance, even if it is something little. Mm-hmm. And then my last one for you is the scene where the Cosmos show Takuya, Masako, and Ando a cave painting of Mothra fighting Batra, and then explain the history between the two. This is echoed in Godzilla Final Wars with Gigan replacing Batra.
We'll get to Final Wars, but Final Wars is interesting that it's kind of a big blender of the best and worst of 50 years of Godzilla history. So it kind of has winks and nods and connections to all of the different eras in its own ways, and I do that is something that's fun about Final Wars.
Yeah, like I said, I did not like Final Wars growing up, and after rewatch after rewatch, I got to give this another chance. People keep saying this is a great movie, and then I was ripping on it in our Godzilla fan group on Facebook, and people are like, just give it a chance. And I'm like, all right, I'll sit through it. I'll watch it again, and I can find some enjoyment out of it. There's so many monsters and stuff. It just that the first hour to me is something that I can skip almost every time and just get right to the monsters.
Yeah, it's one of those where, when you're 13, it's kind of the best movie ever, and then when you kind of become an older teenager and you feel like your taste in movies is maturing, you're like, this is bullcrap. Final Wars is goofy nonsense bullcrap. But then once you get a little bit older, you just start to embrace it for the insanity that it is, and it's like, this isn't the original. This is its own thing, and now it's got that kind of nostalgia because it's such a blender of kind of X-Men vibes and Matrix vibes and some Independence Day in there with some Destroy All Monsters and some goofy 60s, 70s Godzillas, but then also some kind of, bringing in some of the 2000s element of more modern Godzilla. It's just such an absolute blender of a movie that it's hard not to embrace it and just kind of lean into it. When it was the last Godzilla movie, when it was the 50th anniversary movie, it felt like a joke. It felt like it was almost disrespectful. But as just one of the movies, it's a pretty damn good time.
Yep, it's something you definitely have to come to appreciate. They got all the alien kind of side stuff again. It's one of those movies that gives you a taste of a little bit of Showa, a little bit of Heisei, its own little blend of the Millennium. It gives you so much in one film that you gotta just mix it all together and have a good time.
Yeah, I've got one little piece of trivia that I want to share for Godzilla versus Mothra before we move on to some other areas. And apparently, there's a piece of trivia that says in the movie, Characters don't react with much of surprise to the appearance of Mothra, her fairies, and Batra. When asked why this is, director Takao Okawara just said, "It's a monster movie, so of course it has monsters in it." And I think that's a little bit more profound than some people might expect, because, you know, this is the genre that we're dealing with here. You know, and other people have talked about this. There have been critics and commentators that have mentioned this sort of thing before, that in musicals, nobody explains why people break out into song and dance. It's just sort of part of the fabric of that reality. And, you know, this is now, you know, multiple films into this canon and this storyline where multiple monsters have shown up in this world. So humans wouldn't really react as much in shock to more monsters arriving. It's kind of just part of this world now. These are kind of just a discovery that's been made, you know, just like we don't all get up in arms when a new species of animal is discovered.
Yeah, and then they replicate that in the Monsterverse nowadays, that, you know, they're like, oh, you know, now Godzilla showed up in the Mutos, and then in King of the Monsters, they're like, how many of these things are there? 17. And they just say it like, oh, what are you drinking? Oh, I got a Coke today. Oh, there's...
Yeah, they
okay.
They sort of give the creatures a kind of unified origin of they're all from the Hollow Earth in some form or another. And so then that kind of, when you kind of give it one big kind of sweeping origin, it's like, okay, then yeah, there could be no ceiling on how many there are, you know?
Yeah, kind of like the ocean, you know? They say that we've only explored like 7% of the entire ocean or something like that. So who knows what's down there?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a horrifying statistic, whatever it is. And yeah, so it's like, you know, roll with it, you know. I used to kind of be one of those where it's like, oh, I don't like it as soon as they start to get like magical monsters. I used to kind of have a thing against it because I liked the sci-fi side of it, but it's like, it doesn't really matter. It's like, you know, magic and sci-fi, it's all like hyper reality, it's all super advanced, what have you, you know, so it kind of doesn't matter so much.
Nope. I mean, it's all... I guess I don't know how to put it.
It's par for the course. I mean, are you watching a monster movie or aren't you, you know?
Yeah, you know, if you're watching a romantic comedy, you know, a rom-com, you're not going to expect a monster to show up halfway through.
Exactly. So, you know, this is the genre we're in. That's the ticket you're buying. So get on board.
What do you want to do next? What do you want to go, numbers or character and all that?
We kind of did most numbers, didn't we?
No, I got some numbers for your ass.
Okay.
No.
Well then drop the numbers, and then we'll get into talking about the film itself.
All right, let's get into some numbers then. This film sold approximately 4,200,000 tickets in Japan, becoming the number one Japanese film on the domestic market in 1993. It earned 2.22 billion yen in distribution income and grossed 3.77 billion yen in total. Has a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 6.1 out of 10 rating on IMDb. 89% of Google users liked this film. Godzilla is on screen for 15 minutes and 16 seconds, or roughly about 15% of the film, and his first full appearance comes at about just under 33 minutes, or 33% into the film, and we get a very early tease of him when the meteorite crashes at about a minute or 1% into the film. And those are my numbers on Godzilla vs. Mothra for you.
Yeah, I like that. And it's interesting you talk about the billions of yen that were generated. From what I understand at this time, the merchandise side of the Godzilla franchise was popping. So every time they dropped one of these movies, even if the movie wasn't necessarily the biggest or given the most warm reception, it spiked all the merch sales, and they were making more, you know, as much as or almost as much off the toys and the shirts and all of the games and stuff as they were the films themselves. It was kind of the whole industry around it, and it was all. And every time they dropped a movie, it spiked all that stuff, you know. So it was booming in the 90s for Godzilla in Japan.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was growing up, it was booming over here in the U.S. You know, I knew a bunch of kids that had the Godzilla collectibles, and then, you know, you would buy.
Yeah. I had a shocking amount of Heisei era toys from a time before some of these were even dropping on VHS in 1998. Like, I remember being a little guy, 4 or 5 years old, and having, you know, because I had an older brother too, and we had a bunch of the Heisei versions of these toys of the Mechagodzilla, Mecha King Ghidorah, Godzilla, Mothra, and like my cousin had a Batra, like, and these movies weren't over here yet. You know, it was shocking.
I remember having, like you said, the Mecha King Ghidorah, the King Ghidorah, you know, that the one I could take its, like, pop its 3 heads off like Godzilla. It was blowing his atomic ray and then, you know, throw one of his heads across the bedroom or something. Mm-hmm. I was a little nerd with the toys back in the day, you know.
Yeah, and then I remember we had a bunch of the little, like 2 or 3 inch figures that came in kind of packs with multiple ones, because I remember I had a Biolante, and it, you know, it had all of them in there too. And I liked those smaller ones because I could kind of, you know, have 2 of them kind of fight and fly around each other and do what have you a little easier because they could fit in my little kid hands.
Yeah, I had one Godzilla from the Heisei that was like a foot tall. You know, you turn the button on and he'd start roaring, and I destroyed him as a young kid.
Yeah, that's the one. I remember I left batteries in it and like the batteries, like, you know, burst or rotted or got really old in there, and so then you couldn't put batteries in it anymore because it was all, like, you know, dilapidated in the battery port. But I still played with that toy though. I loved that toy.
And that's why anytime that one of these films is released and they release, you know, the box figures, you know, I can't think of who the supplier is that makes them. I don't have any.
A couple at this point.
I always bought them from Target because when Godzilla vs. Kong and that and Godzilla King of the Monsters were coming out, Target had them like crazy. So I bought them up and just left them in the box for the future man cave to be hung up and displayed.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's one thing I'm not really. I'm surprised that I don't do it more as an adult, is like the physical side of it. I don't really do a lot of figures and collectibles and things like that. Like I said, it's probably because I moved so much as a young person that I was always getting rid of things and packing things up and selling things off, that I kind of like, I don't have a whole lot of like knickknacks that I collect and keep. So that's, I don't know, that's a me thing, but I mean, I'm pretty much set here, so maybe I need to start building my own man cave.
Yeah, there's a poster site that I found on Facebook that has a lot of the Showa era, Heisei era, just a lot of the Godzilla film posters. Mm-hmm. And I think they're like $30 a pop, which is actually pretty cheap, and they come with a frame and everything, and they look super nice that I want to start purchasing here. And
yeah, I was gifted a frame poster from a friend of the original 1954 Godzilla poster, and so that's up on the wall. But I would love to have the artwork that I think the artist his last name is Ohrai, Ohrai, who did a lot of a very similar like painted poster artwork for all of the Heisei films, and I think a few of the Millennium films. But gorgeous poster artwork, and I would love to have that stuff framed because that was just great.
Well, I'll have to send you that link to that and see, because I know they do have quite a bit, so maybe we can find some stuff on there for you to purchase down the road.
Yeah, get the whole office set up in a whole Godzilla landscape.
Get your podcast room set up, man.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely.
All right. Well, do you wanna go into some favorite character? I'll go first unless you want to.
Yeah, you can go first. I'll go first on score after that.
All right, we can do that. My favorite character. Forgive me if I butcher this, but I believe his name was Takaya Fujita. He was the father or the Indiana Jones type character.
Yeah, he was my favorite character as well. I like I said, here, I'm taking yours. You go first.
No, that's all right. I just liked him. He's the father figure, you know, and he's eventually tries to do right by his daughter, figure his life out. And I do like in the dub where she's like, "Daddy, I don't want you to be a robber anymore," or whatever. And his ex-wife is like, "I didn't tell her. She just knows."
Yeah,
there's a couple good lines in the dub,
and that's a surprisingly, like, I'll say the human side of this story. I never thought of it growing up, but I think the reason that I've always been inclined towards it is because when I was a kid, my parents went through a divorce. So, like, I kind of like the whole divorced parent thing and the whole "I didn't tell her, she just knows." Like, any kid that's kind of gone through that kind of mom versus dad lifestyle kind of knows exactly what she means by that. Kids just have eyes, they have ears, and they're picking up on more than the parents think they might necessarily be picking up on. And so that's a pretty, that whole sentiment, that whole energy around that dynamic is pretty true. That's pretty accurate. And but I've always liked in general, I thought the human side of this movie was at least, you know, fairly unique for a Godzilla movie. You know, you've got divorced parents, you've got a dad who's trying to not be a bad guy, trying to be a good guy. You've got the sort of business exec assistant who, his name's Kenji Ando, who's trying to he goes on a bit of a redemption arc as well, realizing that his company's kind of a piece of crap and he needs to break away from him, you know. I do like the human side of this one. It's an interesting dynamic for a Godzilla movie.
Talking about Ando, you know, he goes into his little rant where he's like, my company has destroyed forests, you know, I feel very guilty.
Yeah, it all feeds back. You know, I've heard people say that this movie's too preachy. I've never felt that it's a very particular preachy movie, and believe me, I'm no like save the earth nut job or anything like that, but it's like I didn't think the film was really preachy at all. You know, I thought it was pretty even-handed in pointing out that, you know, companies are kind of wrecking the environment sometimes a little bit, and, you know, that's not the best thing in the world. You know, that's all.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to our favorite character, like you said, I also grew up. My parents went through a divorce when I was 13, 14 years old. So I get that as well. I get the dad trying to make amends with his daughter, be better for his family. And it seemed like towards the end there, he was trying to bring his family back together, you know, reunite them and be a family again.
Yeah, that's my headcanon. My headcanon is that they worked it out.
Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that. You know, I get that gist.
Yeah, and I like the Indiana Jones vibes. I mean, it's one scene, it's one sequence. And I guess a little bit of the island exploration has some of that going on too. But like, I had fun with that. You know, you know, if you're going to ape a genre, like you did the whole, you know, time travel, Back to the Future, Terminator stuff in the last movie. Like, yeah, Indiana Jones is kind of cool and kind of fun and kind of simple and, you know, adventure movie. And Godzilla movies often have island escapades that kind of go hand in hand with a lot of their plot lines anyway. So yeah, the sort of adventure Indiana Jones archaeology thing seems to kind of, it goes hand in hand with that, I think, pretty easily.
Yeah, another film that was overseas making money, just like Back to the Future, had an influence on Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah.
Exactly.
So if you want to go ahead and get into your favorite score of the film.
Yes. So my favorite piece is a track called. First off, I got to shout out to all of the score by Akira Ifukube that when he's remixing past stuff. You know, we get new renditions of the Mothra theme, the Mothra song, the Mothra fans singing their song. You know, the Godzilla theme's back, of course, like all that stuff. Akira Ifukube is just killing it. But the particular track that I like the most is called Godzilla Against the Self-Defense Forces. And that's sort of the new kind of military theme, kind of military battle theme. And it's just an absolute, you know, banger, as I like to say. Like, it's just an earworm. It's a great rhythm, and it pairs well with the scene that it's used for. And it's just a favorite track for me, and I could kind of listen to it on repeat.
Oh yeah, I mean that is a good one. And is that when he had just come out of the Mount Fuji and he's battling with them?
Yeah, and the jets and things are all flying in at him. Yeah, I think that's at least one part where it's used. I don't know if it pops up a few times in the movie, but that's at least one key part and always gets the blood flowing.
Yeah, and it makes me think of, like you said, the military march back in the day, just an updated version, and it's seamless. It sounds great.
Yeah, it's perfect.
I chose one. It was called "The Birth of Larva Mothra."
That was my second choice.
That one sounds a little something like this. I don't know why that one, I think it just hits hard in my head. That's why when it first gets in and it's like dun 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 dun, and it's like, all right, got some bass in there, and then it kind of smooths out. And I like that they play that during the fight scene where Mothra is kind of wearing Godzilla out with, I don't know if you want to say like her powder or like her, what would you call that?
Well, she's kind of firing like some straight up energy beams in this one too, as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I love that track. Akira Ifukube does this great kind of thing where he somehow can make something that sounds kind of beautiful, but also kind of powerful, which is kind of really perfect for a character like Mothra. And it kind of feels like it has the same kind of energy and vibe. Like you hear it and it's like, it evokes your memories of the old school Mothra themes and rhythms while also being kind of new. And I just think like it's a great way, like he just strikes this perfect balance of making something that reminds you of an old track or an old score without just being a different version of it. And so hats off to him.
Yeah, the movies that he didn't do the music and score for, and then he comes back and he makes us realize that we missed him more than we thought.
Yeah, he is, no disrespect to anyone else, but he is the top Godzilla composer for a reason.
Oh, by leaps and bounds. It's no offense, like you said, but it's not even close.
Yep, 100%.
All right. Do you wanna? Well, I'll go quote first. I did character, you did score. I'll go quote. You can do scene.
All right.
I chose Professor Fukuzawa's quote when Godzilla had just come out of Mount Fuji. And it was like a little back and forth. He said, he must have gone under the Philippine Trench. Then he traveled through the lava streams and came out at Mount Fuji. And his passenger goes, that's impossible. Any lava stream is at least 1,500 degrees, isn't it? And Fukuzawa replies, it's a creature beyond our understanding. And I like that quote just because they've been trying to figure Godzilla out. They've been trying to understand him, and they realize that he can just do things that they can't make sense of. He can survive things they can't make sense of. He isn't just something normal that they've always thought. He's an absolute monster that they, I guess, like don't know how to get a hold of. They can't control him. They can't contain him. He's just something that he believes in, or I believe in that statement, that they're never going to fully understand what he is.
Yeah, I love it. I'm a big sort of proponent of the kind of leaning into the unwritten rule, the kind of unspoken side of Godzilla, that it's like, look, this thing is like infinitely adaptable. infinitely, evolving and progressing and changing and adapting and sort of goes beyond anything you ever see on screen. That it's like, this is like a creature, they sort of codify it in movies like Shin Godzilla, where it's like, it's a creature of kind of pure evolution. And it's like that, I think that's something that, that's not just for Shin Godzilla. I think that's a Godzilla overall kind of thing. And, he was dormant in a volcano for years between Return of Godzilla and Biollante. And like I like the kind of continuity of like redisplaying that it's like, yeah, like lava and lava flow, like isn't really much for Godzilla. Like even if it in theory is potentially burning him away a little bit, he's probably regenerating at a fast enough rate that it's inconsequential. Like it's not getting like it's maybe getting like his outer layer of skin and he's just healing almost, instantly from it, like it's such a minor thing for him, like running your hand under hot water, So I don't know. I do love stuff like that. I love when they lean into the kind of impervious nature of Godzilla and that he's always kind of got an ability or an adaptability beyond what you would think.
Yeah, 100%. And did you haven't given your quote yet, correct? That was just on mine.
Yeah, I went on a rant. My one is actually it's one that I had fun with because of how it's performed in the dub, where he says, Ando is talking to his boss, and it's when he finally breaks away from his boss, he says, "Your company helped destroy the Earth, now it's getting its revenge." And he says it in the dub that now it's getting its revenge. And I always just had a lot of fun with that as a kid, and it's kind of the theme of the movie in a lot of ways. Like I said, I'm not some like trippy dippy hippie, like the Earth is a living being, and there's a little bit of that going on, but it's like it's a metaphor, like you're gonna like wreck up some stuff and blow up some islands and try and steal these fairies away for money and steal the Mothra egg for money. It's like, it's just karma, like it's going to come back around to you. And then like, look what you get. Godzilla and Mothra and Batra are like wrecking up shop, like it's just desserts. And I like seeing the kind of subservient corporate assistant kind of telling his boss to go screw himself. There's always a bit of catharsis and stuff like that. So that's a fun moment for me.
Yeah, if I had to choose a line from the dub, I would go with one at the beginning, and it's our main character, Fujita, and he's talking, I can't remember the exact quote, but he's like something about, "Nothing's too tough for me, except the one time I was married to a real stubborn woman." That always gives me a good chuckle.
Yeah, that's a great bit. And, just for the performance, there's a great bit when Godzilla and Godzilla and Mothra are fighting on the ocean and Batra shows up, or Batra, I mean, forgive me, neither here nor there. And, you hear Takuya, he's like, "Oh no, they're getting pissed off." Like, it's such a weird delivery of the line, but it's like some of that stuff like really just adds to the charm and the entertainment value of these movies. It's like I don't need it to be dubbed like it's high art, like it's okay if a good dub would be nice. I'd welcome a great, a serious high quality dub of this movie. I would welcome it, but it's like, there's still a lot of fun and kind of like the tacky nature of the dub of the early 90s, so I like it,
Yeah, absolutely. There's always these little chuckle moments in the dubs that you don't get in the subtitled version. So I like both versions, but just for the podcast so far, I've been watching the subtitled Japanese versions. Maybe I'll have to start watching both, so that way I can get a feeling for both of them back to back.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe it's good that one of us is doing one of us doing the other, but yeah, out full disclosure, Showa, I go more subs, because more of them are only available in subs, so Showa, I go more subs, but once I get to Heisei Millennium, I'm like, I just rock the dubs, because it's the original cut of the movie, and I just like watching it in English.
Absolutely, I can't blame you there. Reading for 90 minutes or an hour and 45 minutes does do a little strain on the brain.
Yeah.
Well, how about go ahead and give me your favorite scene for this film?
I mean, it's interesting because I honestly think overall I liked Mothra hatching, and I liked any time that the fairies were singing and it was overlaying the music with whatever Mothra was doing, which you get a few different moments of that. But I don't know, I just really liked the way all of that was executed in this movie. I mean, obviously the final battle in an amusement park, that's a great, cool, interesting setting. You know, the Ferris wheel of this movie is kind of like part of the iconography of this movie. Like, it's like, oh, the one with the Ferris wheel in the final battle. You know, you think about this one. But, yeah, Mothra, I'll go Mothra hatching.
Okay, that is, I mean, to put it in normal words, that's like a beautiful, like, little soft moment in this film, yeah, with the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mothra in this movie is at her most, like, soft and pretty and cuddly that she's ever been displayed. You know, she's her prettiest. You know, she's got her glam going on in this movie, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that, and we'll get into that here very shortly. My favorite scene was Godzilla's entrance after kind of Batra's laying the little smackdown on Mothra. She's laying on the ground and kind of looks up, and you see Godzilla walking towards them both, just, you know, doing his thing, roaring, kind of giving him a dirty look, seeing what's going on, and he just comes in for the first couple minutes and wrecks Batra. And you see, like, I don't know if Mothra kind of feels sorry for Batra for a minute, but takes his side and actually starts battling in his place. And up to that point where Godzilla enters to when Mothra kind of lands next to face with Batra, that scene right there was probably my favorite of the film.
Yeah, and it's sort of that sort of lesser of two evils, and Batra and Mothra are sort of like ideologically aligned. They're just sort of like the more fair goddess and the sort of more wrathful god of that dynamic, and so they might, you know, be at odds sometimes, but they're kind of coming from the same place, whereas they perceive Godzilla as just more of a chaotic, you know, net negative. So I like that they kind of join forces and team up against Godzilla to bring Godzilla down. I you know, it's tough to add characterization into these movies, and Mothra, by way of having the fairies to kind of communicate her motivations and thoughts, kind of Mothra gets to have a bit more characterization, so you kind of get like a little bit of an arc for Batra, that like him and Mothra team up, and then Batra kind of, you know, gives his life to help defeat Godzilla. You know, it adds an interesting wrinkle to it beyond just being a monster versus a monster fight. Like, these are characters that are kind of motivated by other things.
Yeah, and then we get I guess you could say, the classic Showa 2-on-1 battle, you know?
Yeah, and that's always fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have liked to see Godzilla handle himself a little better against these two, but
yeah,
beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah, I think this is one of the only few times where Mothra fights Godzilla and she doesn't die in some form. Like, I think this is one of the only examples of that. Sometimes Godzilla and Mothra team up, but generally speaking, when Mothra fights against Godzilla directly, usually she's not the one making it out alive. And so this is like a rare W, like a full-blown W for Mothra, although Batra does die, you know, and I suppose they could have flipped that, you know, if they wanted to keep the tradition and had Mothra die, maybe saving Batra, then Batra gets the W and flies off into space. But, you know, I'm not going to complain here.
Well, it may have been implied, I don't know, you know, Mothra going into space to contact the meteor, you know, that may have been implied that Mothra dies that way.
Yeah, only on this recent rewatch was I kind of thinking, because they can kind of touch on it a little bit in Space Godzilla, like they kind of follow up on this little thread, but this was the first time that I watched it that I kind of thought, like, is it implied that that's a bit of a suicide mission, you know, because they're like, remember the sacrifice Mothra made for you. So it's like, you know, as a kid, you just think like, oh, they're going to go out into space and blow up the meteor and like everything's hunky-dory, you know. But this was the first time that I realized, like, oh man, like is you know, the role that Mothra's taking for Batra in that act of stopping the meteorite, like, is it essentially like a self-destructive role where it's like, to take out this meteor that would destroy the Earth, like, this is going to cost the life of this creature, you know. This was the first time that I kind of thought about it from that perspective, so it is interesting. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so I mean, you could technically say Godzilla kills Batra, you know, Mothra sacrifices herself for the world, and Godzilla is stuck down in the sea recovering from the battle.
Yeah, and you know, because Mothra's going into space, and they say that the meteorite would hit the Earth in 1999, and so it's like, is it implying that she's not going to contact it until 99? Like, she's flying out into space, technically, I guess, to intercept it. It's like, you don't get a good sense of, like, just how far away it is. Clearly, the meteorite's far away if it's not going to hit till 1999, but if Mothra's going to intercept it, it's like, that's a years away. So it's like, yeah, whether or not she's going to live or die, she's going out into the far reaches of space, in a sense, you know. It's an interesting dynamic to think about, you know. For sure. And I mean, I'm okay with stating that she survived, you know. I mean, I've always liked Mothra, so I hate that this is counted as a L in Godzilla's stats, but I mean, if you look at it, he definitely probably took the L. You know, he took a win in killing Batra, but he couldn't take them both out. Yeah, it's sort of the King Kong versus Godzilla situation. He lived to fight another day, and then the monster that beat him was never seen again. So I mean, you know, that's kind of a 50-50. I do like about this movie that they kind of it's really self-contained in that way, that they kind of figure out a way to get to explain why Mothra's not really present and active in the rest of the Heisei movies. She flies off into space. You know, they kind of wrap it all up in a bow, you know, very much how, you know, Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, at least relative to this movie, is sort of really kind of self-contained in its own way. Like, in theory, you could go from Godzilla versus Biollante straight to Godzilla versus Mothra, or you could go from it straight to Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. And in some ways, you could skip from Godzilla versus King Ghidorah straight to Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2 without stopping to watch Godzilla versus Mothra. And you could skip Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2 and go straight from Mothra to Space Godzilla, and not really, you're not really missing a beat outside of maybe the little Godzilla being introduced. Like, these Heisei movies have this kind of every other continuity where, like, you know, you're kind of hot-scotching around in terms of the movies that reference and connect to one another. So I think that's really interesting because it kind of makes it easier for people to jump on board and watch any one of them and kind of get up to speed. Well, that should make our tier list ranking, when we get rid of some of them, a little interesting to see how our stories flow together. Oh, it will be interesting. It will be interesting. It's a sacrifice, but it'll be interesting. Well, before we get into that, let's get into monster design. How did you feel about the Godzilla suit in this one? For me personally, and kind of my memory banks, this is kind of like the Heisei look. Like, I know these Heisei designs aren't dramatically changing film to film. They're largely the same. But I mean, I do think that, not that I can necessarily pinpoint them off the top of my head, but when I think of Heisei Godzilla specifically, I don't really so much think of how he's seen and the lighting he's seen with in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Like, this is like images of this one, the silhouette with the red and the red in the background, and him at the volcano, and him in the city against Batra and Mothra. Like, this is Heisei Godzilla to me the most, I think. I think this is like the codifying of the look. Yeah, and from this one on, he does not change very much. You can see more of a difference, you know, from Biollante and King Ghidorah to this film. From here to Mechagodzilla to Space Godzilla, it's pretty true to itself, besides, you know, a couple very minor details, such as maybe like the eyes here, or the eyebrows, or the ears are a little lower, higher. You know, there's very small details that if we wanted to get in and nitpick, we could. But I mean, for the most part, they're basically the same over these next couple films. Yeah, and I kind of like where it lands here with this one. So I'm a fan of it. I like it.
See, I would, if I was going to do it, I would put this right under the King Ghidorah and Biollante design. But I mean, like we said, it's very small differences. So
fair enough. There's something about the King Ghidorah design, and maybe it's just more of a mental thing. Maybe I'm not actually. It feels like his chest is sort of puffier in that one. I don't know. It's kind of odd to. I don't know. Not that that's bad, but like I always feel like it's got a little bit more of a rounded, like chest and arms kind of dynamic, and I feel like it's kind of evened out a little bit in this one more. Maybe, I'm not sure. Like that's just the vibe I get. I don't know.
Okay, so in Ghidorah, he was on the steroids, and in this one, he's been off for a couple months, you know?
he's natty in this one, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I never paid that much attention. I did see that his chest, you know, in the suits, you know, they look larger in certain areas from film to film. But maybe I'll have to start doing a compare and contrast while we watch.
Yeah, well, and in my defense, a lot of the comparisons I would make would when I had the VHS, I would just kind of look at the posters and compare them. And so I think the one, particularly the VHS cover art poster for Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, has him in a pose that kind of makes his chest look kind of rounded and puffed out more so. And I think the covers for some of these other movies don't really have him looking like that, so it could very much be like a Mandela effect kind of a thing I'm doing to myself.
Okay, I could see that. I understand that. Well, what did you think of Batra then, since Godzilla was a little more slim in this one?
I think it's cool. Like, it's essentially, you know, evil male version of Mothra, and like the sort of like the death metal Mothra. You know, you have like the sort of rainbow cousin and the emo cousin, and I don't know. I like contrasts in designs like that, and I think it's fun. So I've always got a kick out of Batra's design.
Yeah, the larval design of Batra was just a monster. It was
huge for a larva.
Yeah, it was 3 or 4 times the larval size of Mothra, and I like the scene where he's just chomping through the water, you know, head up, head down, head up, head down, and he just sends the larval Mothra just flying.
Yeah, it's a great scene, and you know, yeah, you can just imagine Batra, like, you know, setting a background score to him that's just like some death metal, you know, and it just feels kind of right, you know, like he's hardcore. And one thing that's always was fun is, as a kid, you know, when Batra morphs into an adult form, it's kind of like this I apologize. So when Batra morphs into his adult form, it's kind of like this instant transformation. And as a kid, you know, I would talk with my brother, and I'd be like, how come he doesn't have to cocoon himself? Like, how come he just like instantly transforms? You know, and my brother like explained it to me in Star Wars logic. He's like, you know, it's just like, you know, it's how Yoda explains, like the path of the dark side is quicker, but like, you know, it's not necessarily better than the light side. And like that always made sense to me as a kid, even though like it does not make sense at all, like relatively speaking. Like pulling the rules from another franchise, be like, yeah, of course the villains can morph faster because they're evil, and that's how evil works. You know, I always had fun with that, and I always remember that every time I see Batra just like instantly transform. I'm like, yeah, it's because he's evil. He can do it quicker.
Yeah, and he does. He pops out of the water and swims for about 10 seconds, and next thing you know, he's flying, which I was okay with. I mean, let's get to the point.
He is on the juice for sure.
I also love that his laser beams out of his eyes are like a purple. You don't get a lot of distinct different colors for stuff like that. So a purple is like a random throw-in, and it looks good in the dark. Yeah,
and he's got a really like a black and red kind of design, so that thick purple, like it it's a good color dynamic. You know, I love all of the laser light shows, animations, laser blasts, energy blasts of the Heisei films. Like, as a kid, you like the eye candy, you like the colorful, vivid stuff, and so this movie just has a lot of that going on, and I've always enjoyed that. And I think the final fight being kind of in an amusement park, you get the Ferris wheel, like, it's a very colorful movie, and I, you know, it's just, that's enjoyable. You know, not everything's just like dark, drab shades of gray and charcoal and green and concrete. You know, I enjoy it.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to say that kind of caught me off guard is he's 100 meters in this, and from here on out in the Heisei, which is about 330 feet, like 328 feet, I think is the exact. And that Ferris wheel is just as tall as him. Who the hell is riding a 315-foot tall Ferris wheel?
Yeah, that's like, you can't, it's hard to think about it like that, but it's like, I don't know if there's, and again, I've not done Japanese research, I don't know what the world's biggest Ferris wheel is, but I feel like that one is maybe gotta have the record. I don't know, because like it seems massive. Like, I don't know what the average size Ferris wheel is. Like, I don't know if it's like 40 feet, 50 feet. I you know, it's hard. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like 300 is standard issue.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of heights by any means, but I don't think I'm getting on a 300+ foot Ferris wheel.
Yeah, the Ferris wheel in particular, it's like, that seems like they seem a little unstable on like their standard size. Like, I can't imagine scaling it up and rotating it and like it being that huge. It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because when Bachra crashes that into him, it's damn near his entire length, I think, besides his feet. It's from his head all the way down to his ankles, so I'm not getting on that. Okay, well, I did some quick Googling. The tallest Ferris wheel in the world is an 820-foot one in Abu Dhabi. And the record holder before that, it opened in October 2021, but it's no longer in operation. So maybe there's something to do with that. The current record holder since 2014 is a 550-foot one in Las Vegas, Nevada. So I'm curious what the average Ferris wheel height is, because 550 seems to be the current highest average Ferris wheel height. You figure it'd have to be like 60, 70 feet, like at carnivals and stuff. It can't be too high. Yeah, it's gotta be. Like there's this permanent one where like this 264-foot one was the tallest. How tall are typical Ferris wheels? We're gonna learn something today. So typically, height in feet, okay, so that's giving me all these big ones that are in like the 500s. So, but you have to think that most of the ones, you have to think the local fairground ones, that they've got to just be like they got to be pretty small. I mean, they got to be in that like the 50-foot range. It's got to be. Yeah, 500 feet. I might like to go see it, but that's massive. That'd give me some anxiety. Especially if you get caught, you know how they stop, you're stuck all the way at the top. It's like, oh, okay. That almost makes me nauseous just thinking about it. We'll move on to brighter days and ask what you thought of the gorgeous Mothra design in this film. Oh, beautiful design. You can make the case a little too fluffy, a little too pretty, but this is like young, new, hot Mothra. You know, this isn't like 1,000-year-old elder god, end of life, you know, Mothra that's about to be killed by Godzilla, you know, in the original film. You know, this isn't like expecting Mother Mothra. This is brand new, right out of the cocoon, you know, beautiful prime Mothra, you know, so she can be fluffy and she can be pretty and clean and clear and under control and all that stuff. Yeah, this is the Mothra I used to always draw when I was younger, and then I would change up the colors of the wings and stuff like that. But this Mothra incarnation, with how vibrant the colors and everything are, I absolutely love it. This is a great design for her, and I'm glad that they updated her, and instead of, like you said, making it the however many 100-year-old Mothra where she her colors are faded and whatnot, that her colors in this are very bright and vibrant, and everything, she appears first like this when it's dark outside and the battle is all through the night, so her colors just stand out even more. And then she's got the red laser beams, and everything about her is just very bright, and I like that in this film.
Yeah, pops right off the screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, maybe we just have absolutely god-awful notions of how big Ferris wheels are, because, like, even one that was, like, built in 1893 is recorded at being 231 feet tall. So maybe we're just complete idiots, I don't know. Everyone I'm seeing here is being listed as, like, 200 feet, so maybe I don't know what the heck I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and I do electrical work, so if I can't measure or tell, like, distances, we got a problem.
Yeah, man, I don't know. But again, this isn't like listing like average fairground Ferris wheel. I'm sure those are scaled down. They have to be able to, chip a mention.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even somewhere around like 100 feet.
Yeah.
At the most.
Yeah. Oh,
all right, well,
I'll get off my Ferris wheels. I couldn't help it. I was like endlessly fascinated, and Google just kept giving me more and more information, so I was trying to get to the bottom of it.
Google just wanted us to keep talking about it. Nobody ever talks about Ferris wheels. Help us out.
Next week on Chills and Ferris wheels.
We'll have to open the first couple minutes with some average Ferris wheel height. We'll do some digging.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, find out what our local Ferris wheel size is.
Oh boy! But let's get into some tier rankings here. I'll make you mad and go first with mine.
All right, go for it.
At the very bottom, we still have The Return of Godzilla. Probably in the third spot, we're going to have Godzilla vs. Mothra. The number 2 spot, Godzilla vs. Biollante. And still in number 1 is Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah.
Okay, fair enough. I would have Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah at the bottom. Godzilla vs. Mothra next up from that. Return of Godzilla in the number 2 spot. Godzilla vs. Biollante in the number 1 spot.
Wow, so The Return of Godzilla went up. I did not expect that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I had Biollante, then Return, and then King Ghidorah at the bottom, and it's just a matter of where I'm placing Mothra relative to Return of Godzilla, and I think I like Return of Godzilla a little better, but Biollante is still number 1.
I 100% thought you would put Mothra over Return, so way to prove me wrong.
And look, that's a close one. I'll admit, that's a close one, but I do have a little bit of a baseline preference for the sort of the more grounded stuff, the more sci-fi type stuff, and less of the fantasy side. As much as I do have a lot of fun with Godzilla vs. Mothra, it's a little off. It's a little off into that other, more fantastical direction that I'm fine with and I'm cool with and I enjoy, but I like Return of Godzilla quite a bit as like a 80s Cold War reboot of the series, and so I'm always going to have some love for that one.
Yeah, it's a little more down to earth, I guess you could say. So yeah. I feel you there, but it's still my least favorite so far out of the Heisei era. So we'll see if anything can move it from that bottom spot.
Yeah, I can spoiler alert that I think you never know what a rewatch can do, but Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah I think that's going to be immovable as my bottom spot.
That's sad. That's truly sad. That's alright. It won't be in the bottom when we do all 36, so I'm alright with that.
Oh, I don't know. You have no idea how much I hate time travel.
But I know how much we both hate All Monsters Attack.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. Sadly, after last episode, I think you do understand how much I hate time travel.
I sure do. We could have went for another hour on that.
I would have repeated my same points 18 times over again, but...
That is all right. It is all respect here.
Yeah.
But until go ahead. Sorry.
No. I still like the movies, but yeah, I mean, and look, when they finally shake out, maybe I'll think about it. Maybe Mothra will inch itself above Return of Godzilla, but I think for now, I got Return of Godzilla above Godzilla versus Mothra.
All right. Well, two great lists from two great minds. Is there anything you have left on 1992's Godzilla vs. Mothra?
Nah, quick overall thoughts, like good monster designs. I like the human story, like the musical score. I like the colorful effects. I like the simplicity of the story. I like the self-contained nature of the story. Yeah, if anyone's ever getting their haterade on Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, you can just skip right from Biollante to Mothra, and you'll be good to go.
I wish you could see my face right now.
I had to.
We're gonna have to do a video episode one of these times, so you can just see the judgment.
I had to say it, the face palming. You can just pretend that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah never happened.
I quit. So Chris is going to take over the podcast from here on out.
Oh, man.
All right. If that's all you got, that's all I got.
I don't think you want me saying anything else, do you?
Nope. Not on Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah.
Okay, fair enough.
That is all right. This film was followed up by Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla on December 11th, 1993, which was the year I was born. So we'll be looking at that next week.
Very nice.
All right, well, if that's all we got for Godzilla vs. Mothra, thanks, Chris, for joining me. I appreciate all the fun banter we have, even if it's ripping on one of my favorites of the Heisei era.
Always a pleasure. Every dog has its day. Every favorite is someone's least favorite. It's all right.
And one of these days, you're going to like one that I'm just ripping into, and it's going to be, I'm going to give it all back to you. So I'm hoping.
Probably. I'm sure it's bound to happen.
All right. Well, again, thanks for joining me on this one. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Again, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla next week, but until next time.